So here's our app component. Now the code in this component has grown quite a bit, and we're going to improve this step by step over the next few lessons. Now the first issue I see in this code is the duplication of our backend URL. We have repeated this URL in many places in this code. To improve this, we're going to create a separate module where we store our default configuration settings for making HTTP calls. So back to our project. Here in the source folder, we add a new folder called services. In this folder, we're going to add basic modules that provide services or functionality to our application. So services are not about the UI, they're about functionality. So here we add a new file called api-client.ts. In this file, we're going to create a new Access client with a custom configuration. So first we import Access from the Access module. Then we call Access.create and give it a configuration object. In this object, we set base URL to the URL of our backend. So we go back to our app component and grab the base URL. So I'm going to grab everything except /users because I want our API client to be reusable. Perhaps in other components, we need to hit other endpoints like posts or comments and so on. So let's grab the base URL and paste it right here. Now here we can optionally set the HTTP headers, and these headers will be passed with every HTTP request. Sometimes this is necessary. For example, some backends require us to send an API key with every HTTP request. If there is such a requirement, we can pass an API key here and set it to some value. Now we don't have this requirement, so let's delete this. So here we create an Access client and export it as a default object from this module. Now, back to our app component. On the top, we're going to remove Access from here. Instead, we're going to import our API client from services/API client. With this service in place, I don't want to have a reference to Access anymore, so we need to get rid of the canceled error class in this file. So we go back to our API client and import canceled error from the Access module, and then export it as a named object. Okay, now we can go back to our app component and remove the first line. Instead, we're going to import the canceled error class from API client. Okay, now the final step. Everywhere we have a reference to Access, we should replace that with API client. So here's the first reference. We change that to API client. So using this API client, we send a GET request to the user's endpoint. Now we have another reference we need to update. So we're going to replace Access with API client. Now we send a delete request again to the user's endpoint. So look, with this change, our code is cleaner and we don't have a duplication of our base URL all over the place. Let's keep moving. Here's another reference, API client. Here we should send a post request to the user's endpoint. And finally, one more down here. Here we send a patch request to the user's endpoint. So with this service in place, anywhere we need to talk to our backend, we simply import the API client and send HTTP requests.